So what was that thing I was going to say again? Oh, yeah, that's right. Hey, Dan?
Yeah.
Parties, drugs. Hey, guys!
What?
Isn't this Doug Van Pelt from HM Magazine?
No.
It kind of is.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Why don't we talk to him about the Crucified?
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. This is Doug Van Pelt of Heaven's Metal, and you're listening to Discography Discussion, and we're talking about The Crucified.
You're listening to Discography Discussion, episode 106, The Crucified, featuring Doug Van Pelt of HM Magazine, presented by discussmetal.com. And if you're listening to us talk to Doug Van Pelt from HM Magazine, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe, that is Dan, that is Geoff. Ladies and gentlemen, Doug Van Pelt is here.
This is Doug!
Yes.
I like his version better than mine.
And he's here to tell us all about The Crucified. We're not even going to do anything. We'll just like total silence, make it super awkward. It's kind of weird. Jeff actually was texting me earlier this week and was like, is it weird that I like the KGB stuff? I was like, it's not weird, man. I mean, it sounds exactly like what it is. You know, a bunch of kids, youth group kids playing punk rock.
Yeah.
I love the passion of it. They're excited about it. They're able to convey it, and I enjoy that whenever somebody believes in whatever material it is that they're playing, so much so that I believe it as well. And that on the KGB stuff, I was just like, yeah, this is it. I was thoroughly enjoying myself this week listening to it. I felt like I was a teenager all over again.
Right on.
Then I saw when it came out, and I was like, no, I was not a teenager when this came out. I was about 6 years old when they came out.
63, right, Jeff?
Really?
No, I'm not that old, Joe. Thanks. I'm the elder statesman, so they love giving me grief.
So did you get these tapes when they came out, order them through the mail, or did you live nearby the Fresno or San Francisco area or anything like that?
No, the only reason I know about these tapes is because it was all re-released relatively recently, I guess maybe 10 years ago now. It was all released as a complete Crucified collection, because before that, all I'd heard was, Nailed and Take Up Your Cross. I had a Tooth and Nail release that had both of those demos on it.
Right.
And so I'd heard that, but I hadn't heard any of the early KGB stuff until I heard the Crucified complete collection that was released.
Yeah, same here, and that was 2009 when that came out.
Yeah. We've all got that. That's a great little box set.
Yes, it is.
That's perfect. It's like, if you want the Crucified, here it is. All of it.
Yeah.
But as far as Joe, I'm sorry, did you have your intro to do?
I mean, I can do it now or later. It's up to you.
Do it now. Just do it now. Let's get it over with.
Oh, I got to come up with something clever now.
On the spot.
Okay, well, you guys asked for it. Well, before everyone in this podcast decides to leave Amy Grant alone, I'm going to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, then you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, so if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening, and now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
Well, we love 5-star reviews here on Discography Discussion.
How much do we love them?
We like them a lot. They not only boost our ego, but they boost the ego of everybody else that's left a review. That may or may not be true. But seriously, guys, reviews help us out exponentially. Because the world is run by recommendation algorithms, at least the internet world, if you're listening to a podcast that's similar to ours, we want you guys to know about our podcast. And the best way that algorithm knows to recommend that podcast is based on how many reviews and how many listeners and subscribers that we have. So it is literally one of the best ways you can help us out.
And now Doug Van Pelt is going to tell us all about HM Magazine.
Hey, you want me to roll with that?
Roll with it.
Yeah, go right ahead.
HM Magazine. I started HM Magazine in June of 1985. It was called Heaven's Metal Magazine, and it was a piece of crap, black and white Xerox cut up fanzine looking thing, but the idea, the vision from the beginning was to be a full-blown magazine. I just didn't have a bunch of venture capital to start it off right, so I grew as I could afford to grow, covering all of Christian heavy metal and hard rock. Heaven's Metal kind of was born and was part of the ground floor of the Christian heavy metal movement, which blew up in 1985, 86, and 87. So because I was part of that, I was able to grow with the scene and experience a lot of growth, and went from the fanzine status to being in Christian bookstores. And being in Christian bookstores was a funny little story that involves my band Lust Control. In 1988, we released our very first album. It was a cassette album with 11 songs called This Is a Condemnation. And a good buddy of mine named Mike Delaney, who was a really cool and a stellar part of the Christian underground music scene in the 80s, because he worked at Spring Arbor Distributors. It was a giant warehouse. It was a one-stop distributor based in Spring Arbor, Michigan. Double check that city. I think it's called Spring Arbor. It might have been Ann Arbor, Michigan, somewhere up in Michigan. And anyway, he was the music buyer for Spring Arbor. And Christian bookstores, they almost don't exist anymore, which is an anomaly unto itself. But Christian bookstores, started selling books and Bibles back in the day, along with choir robes and wafers and grape juice, probably for communion, and all kinds of things that Christians or churches would need. And in the early 70s, when a lot of hippies were getting saved and coming to Jesus, they wanted to express their newfound faith in Christ to their fellow hippies with the language that they spoke, which was the language of the street, which was rock and roll. So Christian rock was born. Artists like Love Song, Second Chapter of Acts, and Larry Norman, and Keith Green, and all these people were making rock music, and some Christian businessmen saw a way to facilitate that. So they formed record companies, and they pressed albums and 8-track tapes at the time and cassette tapes. And Christian bookstores was the natural distribution channel for that music. And so that's how Christian bookstores became to be like the record store for the Christian music industry back in the early days of the mid to late 70s going up into the 80s. And so fast forward to 1988, Mike Delaney saw my cassette tape, This Is a Condemnation, wanted to order 200 copies of it. So I packaged up 200 cassettes and shipped it up there. And the day that it arrived into the Spring Arbor warehouse, it became a buzz in the warehouse. Everybody that worked there seemingly was talking about it. Did you see the name of this album? Here, pull it up, pull it up, pull it up. Look at that. Giggle, giggle. It says Condemnation, and it was spread like wildfire. So the vice president of sales heard about it, and he called Mike Delaney, and I can imagine it was on the intercom. Mike, I need you to come into my office right now. And when he came in, it was probably shut the door behind you. And Mike Delaney was told under no uncertain circumstances, he had to return all 200 of those cassettes back, because we were not going to sell those albums to our outlets, And some of those cassettes probably got shipped out to stores already, but he returned the cassettes to me, had his tail between his legs, and he said, if there's anything I can do for you to make up for this embarrassing moment, let me know. And I was like, well, actually, Mike, there is. I know you guys have a flyer marketing campaign where all the Christian bookstores, they get a shipment of Spring Arbor stuff, which was like, Amy Grant albums or Bibles or books or whatever. Spring Arbor sold it all. It wasn't just a Christian record company or a Christian book publishing. Spring Arbor was a one-stop that had it all. And so when you got your package from Spring Arbor, there was a little color Xerox flyer in there that said, hey, check out the new, book by Jen, or whatever. And so I said, you guys do this flyer campaign. Can I put a flyer in there for Heaven's Metal magazine? And he was like, yes, we can, Doug. And so I designed a flyer and sent it to him. And the flyer took off in a lot of bookstores around the country. He said, sign me up. We want to get 10 copies. We want 20 copies. We want 5 copies and try it out. And it was so popular that the magazine buyer was looking over Mike's shoulder and said, hey, I'd like to take this title on. Can I do that? And that's how Heaven's Metal, received an upgrade as far as distribution and went from fanzine, mail order status to being on retail shelves. And so, sorry if this has taken me such a long time and I'm boring you with history,
no,
but there's
fine.
A little history of Christian music, Christian bookstores, and Heaven's Metal magazine. And then Heaven's Metal continued to grow, and got a lot of favor from the Christian record companies. They looked at Heaven's Metal as what they wanted to market their product with, a vehicle that they wanted to market with. So I started doing advertisements and growing, and Star Song Records asked me to executive produce a box set, which was a heck of a lot of fun. So I took 31 songs, a song from each band in the Christian heavy metal scene that I deemed was worthy to be in the box set, put that out in 1992. But in 1995, 4 years after Nirvana came upon the scene, heavy metal became a bad word. It was like, the name Heaven's Metal was like the perfect name of a magazine. In fact, it was so perfect when somebody suggested I should change it to HM, I was offended, and I actually wanted to use language. I was at a Frontline Records offices late one night. I traded some advertising space with them for the opportunity to use their video editing suite. There was a little software and hardware program called the Video Toaster, and I was using that to put together and edit my Heaven's Metal video magazines, volumes 2 and 3. And Michael Sean Black, who had a song written about him by this band that would be fun to talk about later. The name of the band is escaping me right now. My Little Dog China was the name of the band. And Kevin Clay released a song called Color Me Black, and it's all about Michael Sean Black, which is funny. But he's a character in the Christian music industry. He was kind of into sales for Frontline, and he came into this office late that night. I was the only one there. I had the key to the place. I was editing videos late into the night, drinking coffee, and he comes in and he goes, "You should change the name of your magazine to HM." And honestly, because of my convictions and faith, I hadn't cussed in probably a good decade, and I wanted to throw out some choice words to that guy that night, because I thought I was offended. I was personally offended. Like, how could I change my name? Heaven's Metal is like the perfect name for a Christian heavy metal magazine. But people like to abbreviate things, especially people from Australia or Great Britain. They abbreviate everything. They call relatives relis. They call universities uni. And people were calling Heaven's Metal HM when they wrote letters to the editor. So that conversation with him got me thinking, though, when I was alone. I thought, you know what? Because people abbreviated already, if I changed it to HM, it would, be the best name change I could do, because Heaven's Metal was so perfect. I can't imagine calling it, Glory Fire or some weird, magazine name. No offense to anybody that has a ministry or business or band or radio show called Glory Fire. I just pulled that out of the air. But in 1995, metal became a bad word. You'd think that, with the name like Heaven's Metal, maybe heavens became a bad word, that I faced pressure from the secular world to tone down the gospel or Christianity. But no, it's actually metal became a bad word. And the entire music industry, you had retail stores that had a metal section. Those metal sections disappeared. Radio stations had metal shows. Those shows disappeared. Record companies had metal divisions, and with promotions that did radio for metal promotions, those disappeared almost overnight. In about 4 years from Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit release and the whole Seattle scene coming along, metal became a bad word. It became like a weight around my neck. So I wasn't getting as much. My advertising sales started to dip. It was harder and harder to sell ads because, the word metal in our name. So we faced the pressure of we need to do something, because the music revolution, which MTV was advertising all the time, had really happened. And, alternative and lo-fi and all kinds of punk rock, and as weird as it could be, and ska music was coming on. So the music scene that the young people were listening to was changing. But what I like is hard music, and I'd been using the phrase hard music for a few years as a subtitle underneath my magazine anyway. So I changed the name of the magazine from Heaven's Metal to HM in 1995, which was kind of nice because it was the 10-year anniversary of the launch of Heaven's Metal magazine. So it was a nice way to put a 10-year cap on Heaven's Metal and start a transition to HM. And the last 2 issues of that year, the little HM logo is kind of like a little gas station oval and had a lowercase h and m. Underneath that oval, it said Heaven's Metal for 2 issues. And then in January of 96, the Heaven's Metal disappeared and it was just HM. And I caught a lot of flack from metalheads because they felt like I had betrayed an entire genre, by changing my name. And God forbid I would try to survive as a business and roll with the changes and adapt to the changing musical climate. But I did, and I felt like I did a good job, and it was a challenge because I faced that backlash from metalheads who thought I was turning my back on the genre. But speaking of heavy metal at the time, hair metal had done such a good job of becoming a joke and lacking substance that a lot of the metal bands had kind of shot themselves in the foot. Commercial metal, which was king of the music world for half of a decade, was releasing some stuff that was just wasn't great. And so the only metal that was growing and being challenging and really expanding things was death metal and grindcore and black metal. And so metal kind of went underground commercially for a magazine. I embraced, all kinds of hard music. And for me, it was always, I enjoyed it. Like bands like Stavesacre, which we might talk about tonight because we're talking about the Crucified, which had members of the Crucified in it. It was always led by the guitar, hard music, punk rock music, alternative rock, grunge. It was still electric guitar dominated. And if it had the guitar in it, it was still rock and roll for me. So that's kind of how I navigated the transition in 95 to HM Magazine. And then HM Magazine is still going today. It actually stayed in print until the end of 2011. So it kept on going. And then after the music industry, the marketing business, and advertising and the U.S. economy all taking a dive around 2008, it became a real chore to keep a commercially viable magazine alive. So after a few years of doing everything I could to keep it going, I went just online only. I did an online presence back in 2007 when the internet became such a big thing and a thing called MySpace was popular. And hope I'm not putting you guys to sleep. But anyway, so there's the history of HM Magazine, Heaven's Metal Magazine. Sometime around 2004, I think it was, I woke up in the middle of the night on Labor Day weekend and thought of this idea of bringing back Heaven's Metal as a side magazine or a fanzine as a complimentary thing to go with HM that covered just metal. And so we did that. So for a while I had, 2 publications going on. Now I sold HM Magazine in 2013, but kept the name Heaven's Metal. So now I have a really cool group of guys that has an editorial team that makes up Heaven's Metal Magazine. So heavensmetalmagazine.com is carrying the torch of Heaven's Metal, and hmmagazine.com under new ownership is still going and kind of carrying the torch of what HM was known for stylistically. So anyway, so there's the end of my HM Magazine history. You're welcome.
Hey.
We're definitely glad you went through all of that.
We told you. Tell us all about HM Magazine. So
You got it.
Message received. No, it's perfect.
Yeah, we enjoy the history lesson. Seriously.
We do.
Cool.
Man, I'm such a huge nerd about Christian metal and the whole scene and how it all came about. So that was all good to me, man.
Don't believe these guys, audience, because I'm seeing them on video and they're all nodding off.
Oh, that's
That's
You
just
can only see-
that's just
They're
the beer.
yawning.
you can only see half my head. So
It's the beer. It's all the beer.
Yeah. Joe's well hidden. There he goes.
There he is. Joe does all the magical stuff for us. He edits the podcast and records it and everything. Me and this guy just show up and talk. I mean, that's our whole
You
deal.
got the easy part.
yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I contact the guests. So, I get people in order.
I have the easiest job, no question.
It's funny because
Yeah.
I was like, hey, I asked Doug Van Pelt if he wanted to be on the show, and he said he'd do it. And then they're like, how'd you pull that off? I was like, I just asked him if he wanted to be on the show, and he said, yeah, I'll do it. I'm going to go into a little bit of the first time I heard the Crucified. I definitely heard Stavesacre before I heard the Crucified.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so because growing up, I'm about 33, so if you want to say, let's say I was born in '86, so by the time I was cognizant enough to be listening to music or rock music, would have been about the time that Stavesacre was, more of a prominent act than the Crucified. But I eventually worked my way back, and I picked up a compilation album, which was Nailed and Take Up Your Cross. And I didn't even know that the Crucified played metal for the longest time, because this is still like early internet. So you can't just go on Wikipedia and look up everything the band had. I just assumed they were a punk rock band, Christian, and then the singer went on to do Stavesacre. So I didn't really think about it that much, and then I started seeing the Crucified pop up on all these lists online of like the greatest Christian metal bands of all time and all that, and I was like, that's weird. So that's whenever I checked out the Crucified self-titled album, and I was like, okay, now I get it. Now I can hear that. What about you guys? When was the first time? I'll start with Doug. What was the first time you heard the Crucified?
I heard the Crucified live at Cornerstone. I think, I could be wrong, but I think it was 87 before, I think that was before the self-titled came out. I want to say the self-titled came out in 88 or 89, yeah. So I saw them live at Cornerstone. They were a buzz in the underground scene. So we were, the underground music scene in those days was people mailing cassette tapes or mixtapes to each other. It wasn't like sending MP3s via email and stuff like that. And they were really awesome live. They were, Greg, it was just a 4-piece, and really people say 3-piece because Mark didn't play an instrument. It was just, pretty sure Jeff Ballou was in the band at that point, and Jim Chaffin and Greg Minier making all that noise. And Greg was didn't have a hair as long as he did at the end of Crucified. So he looked much younger. He looked like a young kid, but he could sure play well and very aggressive musically. So my first, and then Mark was, kind of kneel down with the microphone in his hand, let the audience sing along to some of his music, or get the microphone so he could share it and people would shout along with the lyrics with him. A lot of audience interaction, very hot, sweaty show in these metal barns. Cornerstone Festival, which was like the greatest place on earth when it came to radical Christian music, because they embraced it, unlike other festivals, which were like Ma and Pa, bring the whole family and listen to all styles of music all day long, and maybe a little bit of rock and crazy metal at night on one small stage. But Cornerstone majored on the fringes of music. And it was held at the Grace Lake County Fairgrounds up near, there's a big amusement park up there and just kind of northeast of Chicago. And they had these 2 metal buildings where they probably had some sort of rodeos, or they had animals doing stuff for, rodeos or county fairs during the summertime. But, the Cornerstone Festival rented out the place for half a week. And these metal buildings, when they had a bunch of people in mosh pits running around, and this was like July 4th weekend, so it was steamy hot. And sometimes people from the stage would throw like these giant buckets, like the giant metal buckets that you bob for apples in as a kid, like a horses or something might drink out of it. They had those backstage filled up with ice and like soda pop or whatever, or in water, so bands could drink liquids and keep hydrated. But they would take some of those things and fill it with water and just run to the edge of the stage and throw it in the audience, because the audience was, there was stage diving, there was mosh pits and people, banging their heads and stuff. And so that was like the room got really, really hot, a lot of sweaty bodies. And then sometimes that water, when it would hit the audience, you'd almost see steam coming up a little bit later, because it was so hot, probably almost 100 degrees inside there late at night. So that was my first exposure to the Crucified live, and they certainly delivered live. They were raw, they were heavy, and fairly full sounding. It was just between a guitar, bass, and drums. They had a pretty full sound. It wasn't like some of the recordings, which kind of sounds a little bit thin in places, but they sounded pretty full on live. So I got to hear some of those early songs at those shows. As far as a recorded package, I think the first thing I heard was maybe the Heavy Righteous Metal compilation on Pure Metal Records. I think it was Volume 1. It might have been Volume 2. They released the song Hellcorn as a single from the self-titled Crucified album. And that's not my favorite Crucified song. I'm not really into that song. So my first exposure to their recorded project didn't really do it for me. And even when I got the self-titled, it had to grow on me after seeing them live. When I saw songs like Crucial Moment live, where the audience is going, "United! United by Christ! United!" And just, hundreds, if not thousands of people chanting that, and it builds and builds, and it's just like this, it blows up in this giant crescendo of passion and emotion. Seeing that live translated into enjoying that song on the album. So that was kind of what got me hooked on the Crucified. Is seeing them live and just and listening to those recorded albums later kind of brought back some of the energy from their live concert.
Very cool.
Jeff, what about you?
I don't have quite the exciting story on that. My introduction actually came from Dan. So
I do that.
Dan says you're welcome.
yeah, pretty boring story there. I don't have a whole lot to go with on there, but yeah, it was just Dan telling me about it after we did a podcast about Stave Saker, and I was like, oh yeah, I got to check this out. Because it was As the Story Grows, I think is whenever you told me about it, and I started doing research and really dug it, and I was like, I like the Crucified a lot more than I like Stave Saker.
Awesome.
I don't know if I'm that far with it, but we'll talk about that on a Stave Saker episode sometime in the future. I'll get to tell you how you're wrong.
I'm not wrong.
Joe, what about you?
I think I spent more time listening to The Crucified after Tooth and Nail put out that box set in 2009 than I ever did before that. And to me, that is unfortunate because when I listen to The Crucified, even the old stuff, it brings up the same emotions as listening to The Clash or the Sex Pistols, because I love that era of punk rock that I really wasn't alive for, where it's not about being overdriven distortion, it's about barking at the microphone and just telling everybody how to feel. And I feel like The Crucified could have done that same thing.
Well, I'm going to jump into what I think is what I would consider to be the first album, which is called KGB.
That's
And
a demo, sir.
this
That's
isn't
4 songs. I'm sorry. That's, 10 songs?
No.
Let Dan have his way.
It's an album.
He's
It's got
too used
10
to that.
songs. It's fine. And it's a good thing that Doug knows how it works around here. So,
All right.
I'm
not gonna tell Jeff what to do with his life, but Jeff, you should go to Dan and say, you're gonna buy me dinner I'm sorry, Dan, you should tell Jeff that Jeff is gonna buy you dinner because he owes you for introducing the Crucified to him.
He likes that even more.
even better. I was like, I'll buy him dinner if he's hungry, right?
Yeah.
But, so
I'll smoke some ribs.
There you go.
I'd rather do that.
Right. There you go.
I'm a homebody.
So KGB was the original name of the band, which apparently they came up with the name KGB just for no reason other than, hey, it sounds like a cool punk rock band name. And then people started asking them, what does it mean? And they're like, oh, it's definitely Kids and God's Blessing.
Right.
Which is kind of like a really lame name for a band.
It's not very punk rock.
No, like KGB sounds better,
Yeah.
But they recorded an album, or a demo rather, and I don't know, like me and Jeff have been talking about this all week, but the vocals on it does not sound like Mark Solomon.
Yeah.
It sounds like, I know they had a singer before Mark named Wayne Stone Cipher, and I had to do some serious internet digging just to find that. And but it doesn't sound like Mark at all, especially when you go to their next demo, Take Up Your Cross. You can tell that's Mark Solomon singing, But on this one, I think it's the old guy.
Yeah. That sounds right.
I dug it. I did a lot. I actually liked that vocal delivery. It kind of gave me it is old school punk. I mean, but it made me think like Dead Milkman kind of feel with his vocal delivery. And I like that style personally, but there's just, I had a lot of fun with it. I had way more fun this week than I thought I would with this band, listening to all these old demos from the 80s. It was like a time warp, man. I had so much fun going back and listening to stuff that all of my friends' older brothers used to listen to when in the 80s. So this was like fit the vibe perfectly for me.
In my third
Beautiful.
way through the discography, I kept jumping back and forth between KGB, and then I'd go listen to Iggy Pop. I'd come back and try to listen to the complete collection again, and then I'd be jumping back off onto the Clash. So it got me in the right mood to listen to punk rock.
Nice.
Yeah, sorry.
Dan's just listening to KGB.
No, sorry. I was thinking about something else, but KGB was a really cool introductory demo, and what I like about it is that it sounds really good, which is unusual for early Christian punk bands. You would expect the Crucified's first demo to sound worse than their second demo, but you would be wrong. As a matter of fact, I feel like as far as their demos go, they stopped caring a lot more between releases, and we're going for more of a raw sound, whereas KGB sounds really clean. You can understand all the vocals. The guitar tone isn't really that aggressive. I mean, it sounds like what an 80s punk rock guitarist would play. But one of the criticisms I have for early 80s punk and like hardcore punk and stuff is that it's not that aggressive. It sounds, I don't want to say electronic, but it doesn't have a crunch to it. And that really bugs me because it's like they almost put some kind of weird pedal distortion on it. And I'm not really into that. So that's the only really downside I have to KGB. I think it sounds like what it is. I think it sounds like a bunch of kids playing punk rock for Jesus because that's what they felt like they needed to do. And we're glad that they did and they got that start. But the band didn't really start picking up steam for me until they had Mark Solomon on board. And they went into the Take Up Your Cross demo, which is, again, a really long demo, so I'm going to call it an album.
It must have been funny to see the Crucified in those early days because Mark Solomon became kind of an imposing figure and, with his bald head and his menacing look and his intensity on his face. And I'm told that from time to time he actually, he would get into the crowd and calm some situations down. And, sometimes at punk rock shows there's violence and there's stuff that somebody needs to do something about to keep the order going and keep the show safe or whatever. But when he was super young, I bet he wasn't as menacing. So I wonder, what his tenor was like and what, kind of how he came off to the audience. I think it was probably the energy was probably the paramount thing for that band as opposed to their image, which got stronger and stronger, I think, as time went on. I don't know.
There even were a couple of somewhat negative stories about him during that time about how he just wasn't like that receptive to fans and stuff, and they'd come up and want him to sign stuff, and he'd just be like, no, or he'd write some kind of Bible verse about how you shouldn't idolize people on their merch, which is actually kind of really funny. But it wasn't until I read Mark's book, Simplicity, that all that stuff started making sense as far as where he was spiritually. And how, the band was a very, very, like, upfront, like, Christian ministry type of band. But the individual band members, obviously were doing things that maybe wouldn't fit with that. And just having to do that type of damage control all the time and having to be scared of what you do say to people and things like that. Everybody's got all these expectations on you for how you're supposed to act. So, I mean, looking at it through that lens, I totally get it. Whenever I think about some of those stories, it's like, I don't want to have a long conversation with you and then accidentally mess up and say something. I don't want somebody to hear me say shit on stage and then suddenly nobody buys our stuff at Christian bookstores anymore. So I understand that side of it.
Yeah, I get what he's feeling. I'm behaving myself. Normally, I'm the reason why there's the beep button.
Yeah, we beep Geoff pretty frequently.
Yeah, I have teenage boys at home, so that's just when they're playing video games. That's not necessarily that I'm hearing it from them, but the online chat, that's all I hear is just a bunch of teenagers dropping F-bombs, perpetually.
Yeah.
So I've kind of, to keep my street cred and try to be the quote-unquote cool dad, I always, I sound like a sailor pretty frequently.
My dad is so cool, he cusses.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
you can't be a homebody, Geoff, and have street cred at the same time. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I'm at home.
Make a choice.
I'm at home getting my street cred online. Let's get that straight here.
You're better than me. I'm the cool guy at church that cusses. That's,
But, we're both, Dan and I are both the cool guys that used to run video game stores. So
right.
that actually,
really?
Oh yeah, that's won me so much cred with my kids' buddies. I can't tell you how much that is like, oh, okay, Geoff's the cool dad. He knows all the video games and he's probably better at FPSs than we are, first-person shooters and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yep, that's right. Yep. Although I'm terrible at them, but I don't let on.
Well, getting back to this demo.
Oh yeah, see now you know why we have such long episodes. I'm really good at taking people off on tangents. That's my job.
There you go.
On this demo, this Take Up Your Cross, this is a lot more extreme than KGB was. They're back. They're the Crucified now, which is the best name that they came up with. Yeah. And this is a lot more hardcore punk. I would actually throw it, as far as the year goes, it being in the 80s, and this being as extreme as it is, this is definitely hardcore punk, as opposed to just youth group punk rock. And I appreciate this sound so much more out of the Crucified than I did on KGB, just because it's Mark Solomon, it's heavy. Some of the songs actually borderline on thrash metal, which really is important later on. Yeah. And I love it. I don't love it as much as I love the Crucified self-titled, but it's a huge step in the right direction. And it's a lot of the songs that you heard on KBG, but they're like beefed up significantly.
Yeah.
I think the one of the things is, if I remember correctly, from whenever Mark was on As the Story Grows, he said something along the lines, this is whenever they started getting street cred, essentially, and they were honing their craft because they were playing so much live shows. It was really, really interesting. I think it was Mark that was on it. Maybe it wasn't. But one of the guys from The Crucified was on the that episode and was talking about it. And that's part of the reason why the sound changed, because that's what they were, drifting towards. But that's also what they were getting good reactions from whenever they were playing shows. And so it kind of went hand in hand.
Well, I remember reading in Mark's book about how he sent a demo off to a pen pal, essentially, because that's what you did back in the day. You traded tapes with people, because you're such a small scene. There really wasn't a market for Christian punk rock at the beginning. So the only way you could find like-minded people is to write letters and find people through magazines and do fan magazines and things like that. And he said he remembered sending a tape to a guy of their Take Up Your Cross, or maybe it might have even been Nailed. And the guy's only response is, "Thank you so much for not sucking." Which is awesome, because like you send somebody KGB, you're like, either I'm never going to hear back from this person, or they're going to think it's the greatest thing ever. But it's not the best punk rock out there. But by the time you get to Take Up Your Cross and Nailed, I mean, you've got a totally different monster, and you've got a band that's not afraid to go the more extreme. But they kept their lyrics kind of in the same spot. This is an era of Christian music where we weren't worrying every time a band released an album, are they still Christian? Are they not?
Right.
Oh my goodness.
This band is called The Crucified. They are obviously all about God.
Right. Well, you'd think that, but there's tons of bands that you'd think were all about God, and then like 2 albums later, they're like, yeah, I don't know about it. We talk about a lot of those bands on the show. That's what they call a Dan Terry special.
You're sleeping in a bed of shame.
Is the Christian band that started off very evangelical and then fell off the bandwagon like 8 years later. The Crucified, you didn't have to worry about that, really. At least if there was stuff going on behind the scenes, you didn't know about it. And I really like Take Up Your Cross. I think it's a better representation of what the Crucified was before they went like straight thrash metal. And Nailed is even more. Like, Nailed is super extreme. One of my favorite songs off of their album, or their demo, Nailed, is I'm Not a Christian Punk.
It's a great intro.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. It is so heavy, too, for them. Like, it's so much, like, you think they were playing fast on Take Up Your Cross. You haven't heard nothing yet. This is very extreme. It is straight up hardcore punk with shouted scream vocals. And it's just everything you want if you're a youth group kid that wants to hear punk rock about God, but doesn't want to listen to all the anti-Christian punk that's out there. This was like kind of the icing on the cake. This is the band that you could take seriously in your scene. And that's really what carried them on into the meat of this discussion, which will be the Crucified self-titled debut.
One thing I wanted to bring up too, in their demo years when they became the Crucified and Take Up Your Cross and Nailed, is that they started playing shows in clubs. And there's something one thing that's really cool about Christian rock and heavy metal and harder music, and in this case hardcore punk, that is so cool is it didn't try to stay safe. It didn't stay sequestered in the youth group rooms, just playing inside church basements and stuff. Some of that was going on, even in the Crucified's heyday. Some of their bigger shows were churches in Southern California. But the fact that they had to play in clubs and they played with secular bands, you had to kind of step up to the plate and deliver something that didn't suck. And so the fact that their guitars and their singing and everything was just so intense, and I don't want to use the word brutal out of context, but so brutal that it stood on its own merits. It wasn't pretty good for Christian. It was competing with its musical peers in the streets, and that's one of the coolest things about this band is they had credibility and they earned it. They didn't get it given to them because they were Christians or had nice lyrics. They earned it through riffs and screams and blood, sweat, and tears. It was awesome.
Yeah, if you don't listen to the lyrics, which I'm prone to do, I mean, it's just like you said, it's a brutal band, and that's in a good way. And that's exactly, I guess, if you're a a Christian band working on cracking into the secular market, and you're playing against your with your secular peers, that's what you want. The message is a plus, but you want to be able to be based on your abilities and not on your religion, and that, I think they did that quite well. There's a lot of bands that, like we talked about, the Dan Terry specials, I think they start out as Christian bands because they think that's the quick, easy way in to grab that quick buck, and then once they're established, they're like, oh, I don't know, we're a secular band now. We drop F-bombs and we're cool now, and that stuff just drives me nuts. I'm like, if you are who you are, quit playing it. If you were lying all these years, that just pisses me off. That's just trash. That makes me angry. And these guys are just Crucified is just the complete opposite. They're badass, through and through in a good way. So I really, really, really enjoyed this week listening to this discography. I knew I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't expect the demos to be as good as they were before, the self-titled hit. I was shocked in a good way. I was super happy.
Yeah.
I think that this album has some balls on it, if I'm allowed to say that.
You are.
Okay.
Balls.
Perfect. Lots of balls on this episode.
Huevos Rancheros.
Oh, there you go. These are some ballsy songs. At one point, he even calls out Slayer, which is the craziest thing I've ever heard, like a Christian thrash metal band too, where he's like, yeah, and those boys of South of Heaven act all concerned, and then they turn around and charge $20 for a T-shirt. And I was like, man, like, this isn't even like a theological thing. This is like, you guys suck because all you care about is money. And I'd never heard that out of a Christian band before, like calling out a prominent band that was in the same genre. But this is so aggressive and so intense. I mean, when the pit comes on, it loads. I mean, it comes in just like any other heavy metal album. You've got guitar squealing going on all over the place. And then it goes into this punk rock thrash metal rhythm. And you've got Mark's vocals are hitting you like a machine gun. Just bam, 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 bam. And he's so on point and he sounds so good. And you're just like, oh my God, like, where's this band been my whole life? Especially if you hadn't listened to a lot of thrash metal bands before that. And I would imagine that a lot of Christians probably hadn't. If they were only raised in Christian music, you've got your Bride and stuff like that. And, you've got bands that were heavy, but like not like this. Mm-hmm. This was like a whole different beast. And even today, I think it stands up where people are appreciating, old school thrash metal a lot more. It was great to see how they made the transition from being a hardcore punk band to being a thrash band. And it was actually almost seamless. Like, you'd almost have to be blind not to see it coming.
Yeah.
And for the record, I think Hellcorn is awesome.
It is a good song. I don't want to, but at the time, I did not like it.
They went on the self-titled for a long time.
Yep.
That was like their big thing. So when Pillars of Humanity came out, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't like this one as much.
Really?
I really didn't, and I know it's like considered to be like their masterpiece, like their swan song. But I actually found this one, in comparison to the first Crucified album, to be kind of boring.
Yeah.
It was more thrash than punk, I feel. And it was like a little bit more metal, and it had a little bit of that like early '90s hardcore in it, which is a style of music that I really like. Like, I can see the transition from bands like the Crucified on Pillars of Humanity. I can see how you got stuff like 6 Feet Deep from that, and how you got like Unashamed and like all those, and Focused and like bands like that. I understand that it's important historically, but in a world where I'm listening to stuff like Zao and it doesn't hit me the same way as those hardcore bands do. So when I hear it, I'm like, yeah, it sounds like the self-titled a little bit. You can tell that's Mark Solomon, and the drums are intense. Everything's intense. The record's good, but it doesn't have the same immediacy that the self-titled album did. Mm-hmm. And that could just be me hearing it years later instead of hearing it the year it came out.
Right. Yeah, it stood apart on its own when it came out. There wasn't, a whole lot like it. There was some thrash that was coming out. On the West Coast, you had Vengeance Rising and Deliverance, and you had Believer out of Pennsylvania, all in the late 80s, that were they were playing thrash in the band Sacrament, and the Living Sacrifice started in the early 90s. But going back to like 1989, as far as recorded product that was out there wasn't hardly anything else like that in the Christian music scene, for sure.
I'm going to do a quick shout out since you just said Living Sacrifice.
There you go.
We're big fans, especially unfortunately after DJ left. I wasn't a huge fan of his vocals, but the hammering process is like in my top 10 all time.
I was about to ask you what's your favorite. That's probably my favorite of their albums too.
Excellent, very good choice. I love that album.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. I think did I say Hammering Process was my favorite one? I might have said Reborn.
This might have been revisionist history going on right
I have
now.
to have some continuity with what I said on the episode. It definitely wasn't.
It was not.
It wasn't non-existent.
No,
it might have been Conceived in Fire. I think it was the one they put out after the Hammering Process.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although DJ is an awesome dude and
he's so
actually
cool.
has a really awesome voice. We just didn't think so when we did that episode. But yeah, Pillars of Humanity was a good record, and I appreciate what it did for Christian hardcore. I think I even mentioned whenever I was talking to you about coming on the show that Christian hardcore wouldn't exist without the Crucified.
Yeah.
I think that is a true statement, just because I can hear people taking ideas from what they did on the Pillars of Humanity and kind of beefing them up even more, and actually kind of slowing it down. And because hardcore, I remember being kind of slow, like earlier hardcore. I remember like hearing stuff like 6 Feet Deep and being like, yeah, it's kind of like the Crucified, but a lot slower and like more emphasis on the heaviness, and that was before bands were playing like Feedback and trying to find other ways to be extreme. But I could definitely hear the influence on it. But for whatever reason, Pillars of Humanity just didn't really do it for me.
Yeah.
What did the rest of you guys think? I don't want to be the elephant in the room here.
Well, I think you're wrong. How's that?
Fair.
It's definitely they progressed very quickly. The sound is considerably different than where they started at, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Whenever we did an episode of Drunken Lullabies on Stavesaker, and we were listening to Travis Turner. I keep going back to As the Story Grows, but that was one of my favorite episodes. Was whenever they were talking about the Crucified. It was I totally lost where I was going with this. How awesome was that? Because I see Dan out of the corner of my eye grabbing
Pillars of Humanity.
Oh yeah, I heard that because I've heard Stavesaker so many times, and I was just like, it's adequate for me. I was not a big fan overall, and then I heard Pillars, and I'm like, this is what Mark did before? Are you kidding me? And he went to that, and I was like, Crucified is awesome. I was like, I'm loving this stuff.
Yeah, they are.
And I definitely, I think the reason why I like Crucified so much is because I heard the downplayed version of what Mark has become with Stavesaker, and I love the intensity that the Crucified had, comparatively speaking, and it just because Pillars was the first thing that I heard, and it just blew me away because I was like, this is not what I was expecting, and absolutely loved it.
Yeah, Mindbender to me just showed them coming up with just a great song. That's probably my favorite Crucified song of all time, although The Power of God, and I want to talk about the Straining Life and The Power of God later, but when I heard Mindbender the first time, I was just like, oh my gosh, they've arrived. The progression of their sound had really gone up a notch for me, and totally liked that album from the get-go. And they came to Austin to play. I'd like to tell a couple of concert stories if I can.
You can, yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay. So the Crucified comes to the Austin Opera House. There was an 86-year-old lady named Blanche Paul who she had a son-in-law who got saved, came to Christ and changed his life out of a life of drugs and being kind of a loser husband probably, came to Christ through Christian heavy metal. So this 86-year-old lady put on Christian metal shows. She brought Believer, White Cross, the Crucified, Sacrament, all these bands came in because of her. She would just put on a show out of her own money, and sometimes she would get enough people there, like 100+ people there, paying their ticket price to make the situation work, but she brought in shows on a regular basis. So the Crucified played the Austin Opera House, which was a fairly large venue. It was a single-story place and had a large room in it. And it was funny, before the show, I went out there while they were setting up during the day before the show started. And Mark Solomon kind of called me back into the hallways behind the place and wanted to talk to me. And it was funny. He was kind of grilling me like, why don't we give his band more coverage in Heaven's Metal? Is there some sort of prejudice against the band? He really wanted to know why they weren't getting more love out of the pages. And I don't think I laughed in his face, but I kind of chuckled and thought, dude, we love you and we give you coverage, and we don't have a bunch of reporters that go out and dig up new bands. We just kind of report what comes to us, and maybe your publicist isn't hitting us up enough to be covering you all the time. I don't know, but it was funny that he really wanted to know what the score was and why he didn't get more love in the pages of Heaven's Metal. And I can't remember right now if the Crucified played Austin twice. I think they only came to Austin once, and it was on that tour. And my band Lust Control opened for them, and it was a funny show because all the members of the Crucified just got chairs in the back of the room, kind of about 20 yards away from the stage, and just sat there and just wanted to see this silly punk rock band they'd heard about. And we played a 1 hour and 15-minute set, which was agonizingly long for all the people who were there to see the Crucified. Here's this local band that, the adage is you're supposed to, as a warm-up act, you're supposed to warm the audience up and make it quick and leave them wanting more, so that people are all there to see the main act. So we not only played an hour, but we told the MC, hey, get the audience to ask us out for an encore. And he's like, what? And he's like, no, do it. And so he egged the audience on to ask us for an encore. We played 3 more songs, and I found out later that Blanche Paul was going ballistic. What are they doing? She was about to have a cow because we kind of spurred this on. And that's kind of one of those funny, embarrassing moments that I actually did with my band that I shouldn't have.
Did you open with Saved by Grace?
Yeah, usually we bookended our shows. We opened up with Grace, and then the last song we would play had the Grace reprise at the end. So in between Grace, you'd hear all this condemnation and all this finger pointing, but we started and ended with Grace, so we could kind of make that point. There was grace for us all.
I have to know then, did you get the crowd to chant along with the Big M?
Yeah, most shows probably
That's
had
awesome.
people laughing.
That's awesome.
And at least by the second, the chorus is like a repeat of that word 4 times, so at least by the second or third time they would chime in. And if they wouldn't, I'd put a microphone on their face and make them.
The Lust Control songs weren't that long, though. Like, did you guys play like 47 songs?
Well,
or was there just like a lot of talking between songs?
by then we had a few albums out, so I always preached a little sermon and kind of told people what I thought the biblical reasons for sexuality and purity were, and tried to give people, I always wanted to give people, not just tell them something, but explain why. So I always used to like to give my spiel on sex to the audience. And so we'd have a time for a sermon and try to provide time for a ministry sometimes where we could pray with people and stuff. So we started, during that era, we started putting on shows where we wanted a Lust Control show to be like an event where it wasn't just only about the music, but we wanted to be something that, since dressing it serious, we wanted to kind of give it a little bit of seriousness. So at least something somebody could take home and base something on. So
Very cool.
It does make me a little upset, as much as we've listened to We Are Not Ashamed, and as many times as I've seen Audio Adrenaline live, all those times I never got a chance to see Lust Control.
Well, we never
It's my
played St.
fault.
Louis.
I need to come to
Grow
Austin.
up in St. Louis?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've been here for life.
Except for
Except
me.
this guy.
Yeah, I moved a lot, but I'm originally from the area.
We played Bartlesville, Oklahoma. We played Minneapolis, Minnesota. We played Cornerstone a couple times. And then Dallas and Houston and Corpus Christi and San Antonio. Those were in Austin a lot.
So, Jeff, I want to give you some context here. It's entirely possible you could have been walking down the street in Austin and walked past... It's making me laugh just trying to say it. You could have walked past a venue and heard an entire crowd of people chanting, "Masturbation!"
But I mean, that's your entry point. Then you're like, well, I got to go check this out now. I mean, there's no, yeah, absolutely. Oh man,
What's going on in there?
yeah, what's going on in this show? Like that's the whole point, right?
We got him.
Yeah.
He's in the building. Now the sermon starts away. Jeff's like, this isn't what I signed up for.
No, I grew up in a very my parents weren't that religious, but my grandparents are a very important part of my life, and they were very religious. They both grew up and stayed in the Church of the Nazarene their entire life, and it was very religion was a very important thing to them. The interesting thing is the most risque that my grandmother would get with music was she bought me every Christmas she'd buy me a Carmen CD, and that was like her.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was her trying to be hip and get me into. That would be the music that she thought it would bridge the gap, so to speak.
The champion.
Yeah. Oh man.
Another one bites the dust.
That was it was very difficult because my parents would make me listen to it, at least when I was at grandma's, and then because
Now, son, she spent money on this, so you need to listen to it.
Oh, and she'd quiz me on it too.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
She quizzed you on Carmen lyrics?
Yep. To make
You
sure
know what
that
he's trying to say here?
Yes, I'm serious, and she would start. It would be her way to start an in-depth conversation with me about religion.
Well, she was trying to relate to you,
Oh yeah, I'm not trying to say that. I mean, it was my mom's parents, and I love them to death. I always tell everybody like, "Who's your hero?" And I'm like, "It's my grandfather." I was like, "There's not a more loving, caring person on the face of the earth, that was a joy to be around." I mean, he made me want to be a good person because I wanted to be like him.
I'm hoisting a beer to you. It's called Willin, Willin, and it's by the Brazos Valley Brewing Company out of College Station, Texas. It's an IPA that's kind of citrusy. Anyway.
Oh, have you ever had Space Dust by Elysian?
All right, Dan, I'll be here for a while.
Yeah.
It is my favorite beer. It is I'm drinking it. I'm drinking it right now, and it's the same thing. It's an IPA with citrus, and it's like my
it's better on
signature
tap
beer.
than it is in the bottle, I think.
Absolutely, if you can find somewhere that has it on tap, but it's getting more and more distribution. It used to just be local here to St. Louis, but now it's gone nationwide, which is great.
Yeah, I'm not a big IPA guy. I'm stouts through and through.
Get out of my house.
Oh, yeah?
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
But yeah, as far as Pillars of Humanity goes, I didn't care for that one very much. I seem to be in the minority there, so I'm going to keep it on there, on that level. But
Yeah, you're wrong.
Yeah, well, you know what, Doug? I'm going to take that from you. I won't take that from anybody else just because I read your magazine.
Especially
Sorry,
Geoff.
I read your magazine for decades, and so I got to give props. But if Doug Van Pelt tells me I'm wrong, I'm probably wrong. However,
Absolutely.
as far as the other stuff they released, so they were going to record another album that did not come to didn't come to fruition. But we did get 2 demos off of that called what was it, Power of God and
Straining Life.
Straining Life. Yes.
Which had different names on it as far as what's the title of that song until they actually re-released it on Light of the Underground by Ocean Records. They released those songs, one on each of their volumes, and but prior to that, when they would play it live, because they were playing a lot back then, especially in Southern California, and 2,000 or 3,000 kids would show up at these shows.
That's crazy.
They were amazing, yeah. And the whole spirit-filled hardcore scene erupted after that with Focus and Unashamed and all that.
Oh yeah,
But
that's
they
my
would play
bread and
those
butter.
songs, and it was like a teaser, and people didn't know what to call that song until I guess they dubbed it that title when they released that compilation album. But what would that third Crucified album have sounded like? Judging by these 2 songs, oh my goodness.
It sounds kind of like the spirit-filled hardcore bands. Like not exactly like, but you could tell that those bands were taking props from the Crucified anyway.
Yeah.
But like it sounded more like they were going in more of that 90s hardcore direction. They were beefing it up just like they did in the 80s. They went from punk to hardcore punk to thrash punk or whatever you want to call that. I think they used to call it crossover thrash. And like and it was definitely that for its time. I think they would have adapted with the times. I think they would have gone in much more of a spirit-filled hardcore direction. Like, I get that vibe
Another
off
thing
of these
I want
songs.
to talk about tonight is the band Pantera. I like a lot of Christian metal and Christian rock. A lot of fans, they gravitate towards. Well, you get the stupid comparisons. You know, if you like Rat, you'll love White Cross, and you know, if you like Elton John, you'll love Carmen. Haha. But anyway, so you had those stupid comparisons, but you also, part of you, just as a kid, you wanted your friends and you wanted the band members of Pantera to know about the Crucified. You wanted the world to hear this band because you just knew if they were both on tour together or both at a big festival and Pantera fans had a chance to hear the Crucified live, they would have been sold. They would have loved that band. And, you know, you can't tell me that's not true, although it's just my opinion. And, you know, if you guys have ever heard any stories about whether members of Pantera knew the Crucified or went to their shows, you know, speak up. I've heard rumors of that before, but used to dream of those two bands getting together, or at least their audiences knowing about each other.
That would have been interesting for sure. I have to say we've entered strange territory on the podcast in that I am not a very Pantera friendly speaker, but it would have been
Tell us
interesting.
why.
Oh, you go back and listen to our
Make
Pantera
your point,
episode.
but tell us why later.
Oh yeah, Phil.
Yeah, I didn't like Phil Anselmo very much. Him and I have actually had small communication since then, so it's been cool. But beyond that, I was not a fan of Pantera for the longest time, just because of the lyrical content. I didn't like their lead singer very much, and I didn't like the whole Southern. Oh my God, it's Texas. Texas is great. No, I'm not from Texas, so you know.
Yeah.
It's one of those, like, it just seemed like overly meathead. Like, one thing I hate about heavy music is the whole, like, I'm tougher than you, nobody's tougher than me, you know. And I got that I got that vibe from Pantera. So if that tour had ever happened, a Pantera and the Crucified tour, I would have seen the Crucified, would have enjoyed myself, and then left.
Nice.
But that would have been interesting, though, because I can see what you're saying about if Pantera fans could get a hold of the Crucified, they would have another band to kind of rally behind, you know, and, you know, maybe the Christian lyrics might have put somebody off or not, but I don't remember Pantera's lyrics. I mean, there was a couple of songs, but Pantera wasn't necessarily not Christian friendly. That's kind of a bold statement, but I could see their fans maybe latching on to what the Crucified had going on, because it was the same sort of deal where you had an aggressive, you know, almost hardcore edge, but then you had this metal backing to it. And yeah, their fans may have responded pretty positively to what the Crucified was throwing down.
Yeah.
But no, as far as to answer your question, I don't know if any of the band members had ever heard the Crucified or considered taking them out on tour.
I
know anything about that, or
no? The only person I know that might know is Toomey.
I have to call Joshua Toomey from the Talk To Me podcast. He might know.
Yeah, he is self-professed.
I'll text him right now. Hold on.
The largest Pantera fan in the world. That's like his band.
He came on our podcast and argued with me about Pantera for like half an hour.
Yeah, we had an episode that we dubbed Dan Terra, because of Dan Terry,
Nice.
Pantera, and we just kind of combined the two. And we had we had a handful of regular guests that we had come on and that were huge Pantera fans, try to dissuade Dan and try to change him to their way of thinking. And really what all ended up happening is I changed my mind, and I pretty much crapped on Phil Anselmo for the last half of the episode. And
Nice.
Dan did it, you know, he never lost ground. If anything, he gained a supporter in me. But that was by design, because I like Pantera's music, not necessarily their lyrical content or Phil the individual. I'm definitely have not been a fan of.
Yeah.
And there's actually a little bit more information that Dan can get into on. He's got another podcast that he does. He actually got to talk with members of Phil's band, and some of the stuff that Phil has been accused of is not 100% accurate, apparently. And some of the stuff that he's done, he admits that he was an idiot and a moron about. So, I mean, there's that part of it. But I just don't deal well with I've always wanted to stick up for the little guy because I was a little guy when I was young, and I'm like, I don't allow it. I just anybody's being bullied or being crapped on by punks, or not punks, but really like bullies. Phil's a bully, and I don't deal with people like that at all.
Gotcha. As you shouldn't. That's cool.
Final thoughts on the Crucified, Doug. I'm going to start with you.
Well, again, the Crucified was one of those bands that stood on their own merits. They represented Christ well. I think Mark's book, Simplicity, is an interesting look into his heart and the conflicts that he was going through. I was at that show in Southern California where he was going to make the big announcement about being an adulterer and sinner and going to step down from the Crucified. And the Crucified just put on such a killer show that I guess it wouldn't let it. He didn't have the opportunity to do that, and somebody jumped up and said something, I think, that stole this opportunity to spill the beans there. But so his book is really fascinating. But the Crucified is one of those bands that I thought represented Christ well. I thought they represented the music genre and their style well. I think they stand out as their legendary status is merited. I think that they earned every bit of respect they have. They weren't cliche. They weren't posers. They weren't image-based. And I like what they said in an interview a long time ago. As a band, they just wanted to make music that they wanted to listen to. They weren't trying to please an audience per se. They were trying to please themselves, and they wrote music that they liked. And, the fact that stuff that they like, we all like too, because it's just exceptional music. Their discography is, way too short. I wish they could have put out that third album. There's no telling how wonderful it would have been, but there's very few albums. It's a rare album where every single track sounds awesome, and you don't want to hit skip at all ever. And those two songs we heard that were like demos, "Straining Life" and "The Power of God," those are like stellar tunes for me. And so I think that third album just would have been fantastic. And it's one of those situations where we can only guess and conjecture and wonder what if. But the Crucified is a band that you should definitely check out. I had a reporter from the Washington Post. He came out to Cornerstone because he wanted to cover the Cornerstone Festival, and he's writing a book on Christian rock. And he released the book. It's called Body Piercing Saved My Life. And this guy, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do was he kind of picked my brain a little bit about trying to understand Christian metal and Christian rock. And so I had a chance to send him music. And I want you to hear the 77 song, "The Lust of Flesh," the Pride of Life, and I want you to hear the Crucified. And so being able to pick and choose what you want to represent a scene. And I think the Crucified is one of those bands where anybody that's listening to this podcast, most people listening in are probably fans. They already know the catalog, and they're just here to argue or hear some stuff they already agree with about how great their discography is. But for those who haven't heard the Crucified, like some of you guys didn't hear them until later on, something else pushed that button. I would definitely recommend them because I just think they stand the test of time. They're not cheesy now. In the year 2019, you don't listen to their music and think, "Oh, that's just so horrible. It's so dated. It reminds me of this era," and it's just awful. They're a classic band, and they stand on their own merits, and I give them totally thumbs up.
Very cool. What about you, Dan?
Oh, well, I think, like Doug said, they're a classic band. If you haven't heard the Crucified, you need to. You have no excuse at this point. I mean, they've got a collection that you can stream on whatever streaming app you want. You can listen to all of it. You can make up your own mind, but I think you're going to find something you like there, whether you're a fan of thrash metal or punk rock. It's all there. It's the whole package. And they're definitely one of the best bands to come out of that scene and are largely responsible for Christian heavy music continuing as it did.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add that hasn't been said by others or myself earlier. But the biggest thing for me was I kind of went in backwards. I started with Stave Saker, didn't care for it too much. Then hearing the Crucified, it was such a pleasant surprise, and I really, really enjoyed listening to the discography this week. That box set, I think it's like 2.5 hours, and it's worth every second. And I agree. The two demos that could have ended up being like off the third album, man, oh man, oh man, what might have been, because you listen to that now, and like you say, it stands the test of time. It was such a tease. I was so pumped, hearing that. And I'm like, this sound, because when I was listening through it, it's like, this doesn't sound the same. This sounds like it was recorded yesterday. This sounds awesome. And then finding out that, that was the last things that they did. And I was like, oh man, what could have been? What about you, Joe?
I want everybody to go home and listen to Lust Control.
Amen.
All right.
That's your final thoughts on The Crucified?
The Crucified is a band you should listen to, because there is not one Christian heavy metal band, especially, that was not influenced by the band, if only from their name. But when you look back into it and actually listen to everything they did, because like Geoff said, it's out there, it's on streaming services. Thank you, Tooth and Nail, for giving us the entire Crucified in one box set. You can hear the punk roots, hardcore punk roots, the thrash metal. You're going to have 2.5 hours of your life that you're very satisfied to have spent listening to The Crucified.
Definitely fair.
All right. One last thing that we do an album of the week.
Okay.
So just really what you've been listening to this last week. It can be, The Crucified. It can be something else. It can even be a podcast or an audiobook, or, or whatever has been tickling your fancy for the last 7 days.
I don't have to listen to The Crucified to do my homework to prepare for this podcast, because I can talk about The Crucified at the drop of a hat. I listen to, nowadays I have an iPhone, and I listen to my music on shuffle, and I've loaded like thousands of songs on my phone, and any song I hear, I really, really like and actually love. So I'm pretty happy all the time with my music collection. And a lot of Stavesacre, and the new Stavesacre album. I just purchased the new Stavesacre album with some birthday money about a week and a half ago. So I've been listening to that a lot. I've been listening to the new Muse album and the new Neal Morse album. I've been listening to a lot. Most of the stuff I listen to like on shuffle. Like, it's not so often that I'm listening to an album, track 1 through 14 or whatever, all in one sitting. But listen to individual songs. And so today, the first song that came to my mind when you asked me that question was that new Neal Morse album. It's a double disc, The Great Adventure, which is funny because Stephen Curtis Chapman, a contemporary Christian artist who's middle of the road, mild adult contemporary style music, had the same title. But Neal Morse seems like all he does is do concept albums that are 2-disc adventures, and his new one is a storyline. It's called The Great Adventure, and so I've been enjoying that. And I'm really enjoying the new Stavesacre. I listened to it all the way through before I decided to buy it, because I don't buy a lot of albums these days. Back in the day when I had a music magazine, stuff just came to me free of charge. It was a wonderful existence. But
I'm sure.
I feel you, yeah.
Nowadays, I don't feel like the music industry is healthy enough to where it's cranking out. You're not. The music industry is almost dead. It's really, really different than what it used to be. I don't think artists are making a living like they used to. So anyway, it takes a lot for me to actually shell out the bucks to buy an album. I haven't been much to buy singles, like going to iTunes and buying one particular song. But so I tracked the whole Stavesacre album, MCMXV or whatever it's called, and I am liking it. And I appreciate the heaviness of it. So that's my boring answer to your question.
Cool, sweet. We like your boring answer.
Well, Doug, in the interest of time, we'll save ours for for later. But if you got to go, we will let you go. But I wanted to ask real quick, where can people find you online, or what do you want to push?
Oh, thanks for asking that. I stay busy. I haven't been as busy as I've been the last 5 years, but I've written like 4 or 5 books. I co-wrote the Michael Sweet autobiography called Honestly, and I think it's out of print already. I think a record company released a book, which is kind of weird. I think 1,000 copies of that book. I saw on eBay that there was it was going for like $200 for a book.
Wow.
But that was a book I co-wrote. I put together a collection of interviews from the pages of HM Magazine called Rock Stars on God. that came out on Relevant Books, which is the same publisher who did Andrew Schwab's book and Mark Solomon's book. That's out of print. But the whole idea of doing Rockstars on God was that I would do volumes down the road. And so when Volume 2 came out, I self-published that, and I decided when I do Volume 2, I'm not going to pick the biggest names like Relevant did. I'm going to pick the best interviews. So Rockstars on God Volume 2 is something I want to push. And so on my Facebook, if you go to facebook.com and type in Rockstars on God, you'll see a page for Rockstars on God Volume 2, and there's links on there to you order it. It's like $15. And I'll give you a discount if you use the word playoffs, PLAYOFFS. You'll get a $5 discount, so you can get that book for $10. Another book I wrote, which I'm using the discount code playoffs for, is Desert High. It's a novel about high school football and time travel. And that was like my great American novel. It's like my baby, because it's like a book that I had to write. It came out of me because when I was in high school, I played football. My senior year, we went to the playoffs. In the first round of the playoffs, we got horribly ripped off by the refs. And I know a lot of athletes will moan and complain about that, but the referees actually met in Lancaster, California the following Tuesday, and they apologized to our coach. They said, "I'm sorry." And I'm 56 years old now. I'm an old man, and I still can't get over that loss. So if I had a time machine, I would go back to November of 1980, and I would fix that game. So that's what Desert High is about. It's like Back to the Future meets Friday Night Lights. And also for those of the listeners who have kids, I've written and illustrated a children's book called Bobby Baby Bear. So BobbyBabyBear.com, DesertHighBook.com, and those are the places people can find me. If you go to Facebook and type in Doug Van Pelt, you can find me in HM Magazine and Heaven's Metal Magazine. I got Facebook pages for all those too. So that's a lot. And also Lust Control, my band, has been busy. We released our finest album to date, which is called Tiny Little Dots. We started as a band in '88. In fact, last year was our 30-year anniversary. We only played one show, which was a travesty, but to celebrate our 30-year anniversary. But last year we did release Tiny Little Dots on vinyl, and that just came out. And I've been talking to Rox Productions or Rox Records. They re-release a lot of Christian metal and even some new albums by some Christian metal bands like Holy Soldier and Fear Not, or a couple new ones in the new Deliverance album. I think they might have had a helping hand with. But they're going to release a limited edition run of the Feminazi EP by Lust Control, which was the music we were working on when we opened for the Crucified.
Very nice.
Cool.
So look for that down the road.
Cool. Well, we will link as much of that as we can to the show notes whenever we're done, so people can just click right on it and go right to it.
Right on.
But Doug, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk about the Crucified with us.
You bet. Let's do it again sometime.
Definitely a fun chat. Well, we're going to do it again, and it's probably going to be with Deliverance, so get ready for that.
All right.
All right, have a good night.
Thanks a bunch.
Take it easy.
Ready on.
Don't go anywhere.
Well, Geoff, what is your album of the week?
So I'm still stuck in Industrial December. I can't get out of it. I can't help myself. So I've been listening to The Storm Before the Calm by Death Therapy. Love that album.
Dan, what about you?
I'm going to take a stab at being a Geoff here. And I've been listening to the new Zayo 7-inch, which is called Transcoding. Oh, I f***ed it up already.
That's what you get for trying to be a Geoff.
Decoding transmissions from the Mobius strip. And it's awesome. You should buy it. If you can. I think they're almost sold out already.
London Calling by The Clash.
Ooh.
Excellent choice. We should do The Clash for one of our non-metal reviews.
We should.
I think we could definitely make that work.
Let us know what you think, everybody.
I'll make sure to have my Telecaster in hand when we decide to do that.
And do you know how you can tell us what you think?
How, Dan?
Well, you can reach out to us on Facebook. We're on facebook.com/discography discussion. You can send us a message. You can join the group, the Discography Discussion official group on Facebook. Lots of members there, lots of cool discussions. And you can also find us on Discord under the Discuss Metal Discord server. You can also find us on Twitter at Discuss Metal. You can leave us comments there. And if you want to go old-fashioned, you can send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com. Whatever thoughts you have on the show, whatever your reviews are, whatever you think. And if you want to submit a band for us to talk about, submit that band for us to talk about. We love submissions. So do it now. But before I get out of here, I want to make a shout out to our patrons. These are the people that are the music makers. These are the dreamers of the dreams. So I'm going to start off with Jeffrey De Los Santos,
The actual Mac.
Alexander, Joel Fawcett, Kiki Kuti. Is that right? Or is that something weird? What is that?
It's not wrong. That's the name.
Is it Kiki Kuti? Do you love me? I do. Luis Fernando
Paisano
Escalante.
Escalante.
Okay, thank you for that. Lance Olligood and Zach Barr. You guys are the best. You guys help us keep this podcast dream going.
You make Dan struggle through saying your names live on the show.
Absolutely, and that is worth the price of admission. So thank you so much. We will get more content out to you as soon as we have it.
I want to say thank you to all of our patrons. $1 will get you into that exclusive album review feed, which by the end of the month will be featuring individual album reviews.
That it will.
And I don't mean the regular individual album reviews. I mean Dan's 21 album review.
Special ones.
They're coming. And on that note, this has been episode 106 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion. And please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
Give me your money.